everyone, RogueGold here. Welcome back to The Division 2. And today, we are back to talk about what I know is each and every one of you's favorite topic, Ubisoft drama. Come on, you can't tell me you don't love it. No, but over the last week and a half, you may have seen that there was a lot of discussion ongoing about Ubisoft, all spinning off from the announcement that they had withheld their earnings report from the first half of this fiscal year. Typically, not a great sign. So there was speculation about why that was happening. Was there some huge announcement in the works? Well, today we finally have the answer. And spoiler alert, largely, this was blown out of proportion, which I know, gasp, shock, people making things a bigger deal on the internet than they are, couldn't be possible. I'm joking, but we finally have an update. We also have the first half earnings, which include information that is very relevant to the Division 2 and the ongoing franchise. So, per usual, I want to keep you all looped in and up to date on the latest. We'll dive right in. You know the drill. Subscribe if you want to stay up to date on everything with the Division and what is happening behind the scenes with the Division. Shout out and thank you to our channel members for your continued support of my content. It means more than you know that you go the extra mile to help out the channel, so thank you so much. But without further ado, let's get to this. Okay, so this all began back on November 13th. That was the day that Ubisoft was set to release their earnings from this first half of the fiscal year. That did not happen. And not only did they not release them, but they also halted trading on the stock market, which, as you can see here, the CFO says was to limit unnecessary speculation about what was going on, which in many ways only fueled speculation on what was actually going on. Again, this led to widespread talk about has Ubisoft gone bankrupt? Have they been bought out? What is going on here? Well, believe it or not, it all came down to an accounting error, as reported by Stephen Totilo, who is a very reputable figure in this realm of the gaming industry, right, reporting on the business side of things. You'll see a couple of hours ago he said, "New, Ubisoft has not been sold, nor has it collapsed. The week-long delay in its corporate earnings, the subject of much speculation, was due to, are you sitting down, financial reporting technicalities regarding two unspecified partnerships." And again, we'll get into more of this, but he says that Ubisoft said the Tencent deal is on track, which again, Tencent spun off a new subsidiary with Ubisoft earlier in the year with Assassin's Creed, Rainbow Six, and Far Cry. We covered that. It does not involve the Division, though, I want to be very clear. Beyond that, they said the Assassin's Creed franchise is overperforming, Rainbow Six suffered a cheating wave, and that they have a mystery game set for release before the end of the fiscal year, which many believe is a Black Flag remake. So I know that doesn't really involve the Division to begin with, but I just wanted to cover this aspect of things because, again, I'd been getting a lot of questions from people about what do you think is happening now with Ubisoft, and we talked about it even on stream earlier in the week. This is the main reason why people always ask, why don't you talk about Ubisoft news more? For one, I'm not a business expert, and I don't want to step out of line and say things that I don't really know what I'm talking about. But two, more often than not, things are really not as initial reporting may seem. Again, if you knew nothing about this, you might think just from reading stuff on the internet this past week that Ubisoft is set for an imminent buyout, and then it turns out it was just an accounting error. So I wait for the facts to come out, and then I report on actual information like this to you all. Hopefully that's a satisfactory structure that we can follow moving forward. But let's now move over to the actual earnings themselves, because like I said, aside from that weird hiccup in them releasing these, this actually does have a few key bits that I wanted to touch on for the Division 2. So we begin here on the slideshow that they released. We'll start scrolling through. Down here, they begin with their actual bookings. They say overall the company is doing reasonably well after some of the big changes behind the scenes that they've been making. Again, I'm sure, and I've already seen that there's a lot of people out there suggesting that they are exaggerating that claim. I will let the business experts handle that, as that is not my area of expertise, but that is what they're saying. If we keep moving on, though, we get to some of their highlights from this first half, and it's pretty encouraging to see that right alongside Assassin's Creed and Rainbow Six Siege, the Division 2 is listed as continued strong momentum with half one bookings exceeding last year's annual bookings. What does that mean? It means that in these first 6 months of their fiscal year, the Division 2 generated more revenue than it did in the entirety of the last fiscal year. Now, while that is great, I wouldn't say it's too much of a shocker, right? We had the release of the Battle for Brooklyn DLC, which was the first paid content that the game released in 5 years. So, yeah, you would hope that there would be a big bump in sales compared to usual, but still great to see it listed here right alongside some of Ubisoft's other big hitters, and this is a trend that we will continue seeing as we move on. If we continue scrolling down here, there is one other bit of Division stuff that I wanted to point out, and that is in their projection for the remainder of this fiscal year. They talk about right here what is in the lineup for the second half of the fiscal year. Keep in mind that the fiscal year does not follow the calendar year, so for Ubisoft, a year goes until March 31st of, in this case, 2026. And so what they're saying is that these following titles are releasing before that date. We have Anno, Assassin's Creed Mirage's new DLC. I believe these two have already come out. We have the DLC for Avatar next month. They then have Rainbow Six Mobile, The Division Resurgence, and then a Prince of Persia title, as well as an unannounced title, which once again seems to be a Black Flag remake. But, of course, the significant part here is the Division Resurgence. We've talked about this before, but they are reaffirming once again, and now the deadline is approaching, so it seems like it might actually pan out that the mobile spin-off for the Division franchise is finally going to release within the next 6 months. We'll see what further information we may get on that, but for now, good to hear. Alright, so that was the flashy slideshow that has pictures and fun things to look at, but I want to actually look at the, official earnings report here because it goes into a bit more detail on some of these things. So again, they start off with a lot of information about the actual bookings from this first half and quarter, which once again is not my area of expertise, but moving on, this is the main statement given by Yves Guillemot, who is the co-founder and CEO of the company, and as you can see right here, he said he names the Division 2 also continued to perform strongly, benefiting from the momentum of the Battle for Brooklyn DLC, with the game's first semester already exceeding last year's annual bookings. Again, we already covered that, but I just wanted to mention that, and there's another part down here that has a Division 2 section. So, the Division 2 continued to benefit from the momentum of the DLC released in May, as well as regular content updates continuing to attract new players to the game. Along with rising player numbers, player engagement is up, with a record second quarter in terms of session days since fiscal year 2020 to 21. Keep in mind that was the last time that we had regular huge content for the game after Warlord's release in those first 4 seasons. And then once again, they note that the game's performance this semester has already exceeded last year's annual net bookings. So once again, not a huge shock given we had a DLC release compared to last year, but things seem to be doing well overall, at least in Ubisoft's eyes, and that is always a good thing. And I imagine that with the increased amount of resources and with things panning out for next year like survivors and whatnot, this is a trend that hopefully we are going to continue to see go up. And on that note, the one other big thing that I wanted to cover within this report is their discussion about the new creative houses that they're working on. We talked about this in a prior video that I will link in the description below in case you want a bit more context on this. But basically, given the underperformance of Ubisoft in the last many years, they brought in a third-party consultant to talk about how they could restructure things internally to better service their IPs and just make more revenue, right? That is what they need. And so one big result of that is that they're restructuring things into what they're calling, as you can see right here, creative houses, right? They're going to put different brands together, give them central leadership figures, and in that way, they hope that these things will then be more autonomous, be able to make decisions that actually benefit and cater to those specific IPs, and in that way, not being so beholden to the usual structure of getting approval from corporate or whatever else. And so what they say is that this first creative house was built around Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six. Once again, this is under the new subsidiary with Tencent, which does not have to do with us and the Division. But what they do confirm is that every, brand that they currently have is going to end up in one of these creative houses. And so they said they will have the finalized design of its new operating model, independent business units with the objective of driving stronger creative vision, greater focus, efficiency, autonomy, and accountability, and that they will be unveiling the full details of this model by January. So once that date comes, once we have that information, we'll definitely be diving into that. But yeah, it says that these leadership teams are being formed with the heads of franchises, so very much expect that Julian Garrity is going to be involved in whatever the Division's creative house ends up being, whether or not we are paired up with the likes of Ghost Recon, whether we're kind of on our own, I don't know at this point. But yeah, I'm curious to see how that pans out in that news come January. And that's kind of one of the last main things that I wanted to hit on in this video, is that I know from this week's news, a lot of people were hoping that Ubisoft had been bought out by really anybody else. And I can't say that those thoughts are unwarranted, right? Ubisoft has been through a lot of turmoil these past years. I think a lot of us believe and agree that they have not treated the Division franchise with the kind of care that it needs or deserves, given its revenue that it's brought in over the years. But what I will say, and we've talked about this in a few prior videos, is that tides seem to finally maybe be shifting. Again, we heard from Massive more recently, although this was met with some criticism from what they were doing here. They are a studio that is now primarily focused on the Division once again. They have small teams left to support Star Wars Outlaws and Avatar, but their main focuses are the Division 2, Survivors, and the Division 3. And that is something that we have wanted to see for, several years at this point. And again, recently I've heard nothing but things backing this up, that Ubisoft is finally kind of recognizing the division's value. They're giving it more resources. And I think that's evident from Survivors, from everything else they're doing. So heading into 2026, I think we're going to see a lot more of this come to fruition. And it's why I'm glad, at least at this point in time, that things are looking to be a little bit more stable with Ubisoft. Because while, yes, there is a possibility out there that if Ubi were to sell the division or just sell their IPs to another publisher, that things could improve for the division, right? That publisher could take in the IP, see that it's worth a lot more than they're investing into it, and really increase that amount of investment. But at the same time, they could hand it off to somebody who looks at it and says, we don't really want this, and they just shut things down and let it go dormant. You just don't know. Right? So, although Ubisoft has its faults, absolutely, for the current moment, I'm kind of glad that things have stabilized, and I think we should really keep an eye on how things perform in 2026, as I believe that will inform the, remainder of the upcoming years for the franchise. And that is the final thing that I want to point out from this before we sign off, is that somewhere they have a kind of what's to come. Yeah, right here. So once again, they talk about what is planned for the remainder of this fiscal year, including the division resurgence. But beyond this fiscal year, it says the group expects to return to positive non-IFRS operating income and free cash flow generation in fiscal year 27, and to see significant content coming from its largest brands in fiscal 27 and 28. In layman's terms, what does this mean? Well, I believe that it backs up my prediction that The Division 3 is currently slated for 2028. To be clear, Ubisoft has a lot of large brands, so they might not specifically be talking about The Division here, but I think that 2028 is a very realistic, point and goal to set for The Division 3 right now. Whether or not it might later slip from that, who knows? But whether it's The Division, Ghost Recon, Splinter Cell, whatever other franchises Ubisoft has, they seem to have kind of learned some lessons from Assassin's Creed Shadows and Star Wars Outlaws, where they pushed those things out before they were quite ready. In turn, they delayed a lot of games that were actually set to launch this fiscal year. And so, as long as they give these games their time to polish, and they allow developers to do what they do best, making these games, then who knows, you might see Ubisoft actually having some hits starting next year. Well, there you have it, everybody. That is the latest on Ubisoft, following up the drama that went down over this past week and a half. That side of things didn't actually materialize into that much, but I would love to get your guys' thoughts on anything that we went over in this video. What do you think about the state of Ubisoft as a company? What do you think about the division's growth that we've seen this year? What do you think about its future heading into 2026 with these new resources, with the fact that they're restructuring things into these creative houses? Let me know your thoughts. Love to hear them. That is going to do it for me today, though. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll catch you back soon. RogueGold.